Alrighty. Well, it looks like we have a good number of attendees with us this afternoon. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Again, this is a little unusual date earlier in the month to accommodate for the holidays, but grateful for everybody's participation. Our webinar series is typically held every fourth Tuesday from 1 to 2 p.m., and so we'll resume that schedule starting in January of 2026, which is a little hard to believe. Um, Whoops, I did not mean to advance that. Just a quick thank you to Virginia Housing for their support of our webinar series and for the Governor's Conference on Aging as a whole. We appreciate their support. So, an exciting and engaging webinar we have ahead of us this afternoon with Ayn Welleford and Rachel Ramirez to present Disrupting Ageism Through Lifelong Learning, an innovative approach to promoting purpose, belonging, and mental stimulation. So I know that Anne and Rachel are likely familiar faces to many of you, and I know that we have a great webinar ahead of us. I just wanted to quickly note some logistical items. We really do encourage, this will, as you'll soon learn, will be an engaging webinar. Feel free to utilize the Q&A box, but also the chat box will remain open. There will be plenty of opportunities for some open-ended responses. And so we can get an idea as to who's with us this afternoon. But if you have any questions about technology or Zoom, feel free to direct message me using the chat feature. In the chat, once we get started, I'll also drop the link to our website where you can learn more about the Governor's Conference on Aging, which is held every other year. So we're entering the off year. But we continue this webinar series throughout the off year. And I'll also link the our YouTube page where you can find all previously recorded webinars in the series and some other helpful links. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Anne and Rachel. But thank you everyone for being with us this afternoon, and feel free to direct message me if you have any questions.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. We are so excited to be with you today and share this presentation that is near and dear to our hearts. And we're going to go ahead and get started. As Jillian already introduced us, there's our contact information, and we have already sent this out to Jillian to share with you after the presentation. So feel free to take notes, but you'll also receive this as a PDF. This is me, as you can see, and I have been the Executive Director at the Lifelong Learning Institute in Chesterfield since March of 2014. And it is my dream job, and I am very grateful for the sponsorship of VCU through the Virginia Center on Aging and the Department of Gerontology. And my co-presenter today is Dr. Ayn Welleford, and she brings a long history of experience and research, and we really, really appreciate your attendance today. All right, so now we get to find out about you. We would love, as I mentioned in my chat, to know who you are, where you're tuning in from, and it looks like we've got Ellen from Circle Center Adult Day, and we've got some out of state, some from Virginia
Great.
Beach.
See so many names we recognize.
Mhm.
I love this. You know, you just
Yeah,
never know who's going to be able to make time for these things.
we
So
got
thanks everybody for jumping in and introducing yourselves. And so yeah, keep that coming. As
yeah.
as Jillian mentioned, this is going to be interactive, and so we're planning to use the chat for different types of conversation. So please jump in.
Yeah, it's great to see Christy Jensen and our friends at DARS and AAA's and um, Department of Social Services. Thank you all for your amazing help and support of our community. I love living in Virginia, and it's because of people like you who provide amazing services to our community. So we're excited to be part of the solution with you and we're going to dive right in. Our goals for today are to discuss the benefits of lifelong learning. We're also going to explore elderhood and how we can disrupt ageism and really love longevity through these practices. We're going to discover, dream, and design together, so just be prepared for that. We'd love to send you on your way into the weekend with some potential next steps that you can pick up on Monday or next year, but something really practical that you can do. And pro tip, you may know this, but if you learn something today that you want to remember, you'll have a 70% greater chance of retaining it if you write it down and then revisit it within 24 hours. I know that's a hard ask on a Friday, but potentially you could revisit it on Monday and have similar results. But really, you'll get these notes. But if there's something that we say that's not on the slide, then please feel free to jot that down. Feel free to contact us with any questions or comments. All right, so we're going to jump in with a definition. Now, as I mentioned, I've been the executive director of the Lifelong Learning Institute in Chesterfield since March of 2014. Some quick math, that's nearly a decade, nearly a dozen years. But I recognize that not everybody's familiar with this term, so I wanted to make sure I started here. Lifelong learning, as we define it, is the use of formal and informal learning opportunities throughout life for one's personal fulfillment. So this is not necessarily academic learning. This is not elementary, middle school, high school. This is not college or career training. This isn't on-the-job training. Like today, you're probably tuning in because it's going to help you with your work. That's great. It's a wonderful learning, but technically what we call lifelong learning is the things you want to learn because you're curious about something, and that could be some overlap with today and some other things that you learn that you also get to use at work. But we say these are the things that you learn because you want to know them. So if you think about something, hopefully recently, that you've wanted to learn how to do or wanted to learn more about, and then you either found someone that knew what you wanted to learn, either in person or online. Maybe you found a book or a video. Those are the things when we're curious about something and then we learn it. That's what we call lifelong learning. And so about 50 years ago, there were groups of people that formalized this love for lifelong learning, specifically in later life. There were retired faculty members at a school in New York, and they formalized this and called it a Lifelong Learning Institute eventually. There were many names along the way, but where we've landed now is Lifelong Learning Institute. And so there are over 400 community, university, and college-based organizations that are providing lifelong learning opportunities for midlife and older adults. And they all define that a little bit differently, but that's pretty loose general expectation. So if you are not in our area in Central Virginia, but somewhere else in Virginia or even somewhere else in the country, if you go online and search for your location and then lifelong learning, you'll likely find the Lifelong Learning Institute or LLI nearest you. So now that we are all on the same page with what lifelong learning is, let's jump into the why. I am a big fan of asking why. I think that started when I was about 2. My mom has ensured me. So why is lifelong learning important? Why are we taking your precious Friday afternoon time to tell you about this? Well, we've come up with 3 reasons. The first is mental stimulation. And this is something that we usually take for granted throughout life. And until our Career Act or our Familial Responsibility Act really concludes, then we realize that there is a lot of intentionality that has to happen in order to learn new things, see new things, and acquire new knowledge on a regular basis. And all of those things are great ways to stimulate the brain. And brain health is something that we hear a lot about these days, a lot of research from many wonderful organizations talking about brain health. And so that is one benefit of lifelong learning that I'd like to highlight today. Through my research, when I received my master's in public administration, I came across this paper. It was called an information paper, a Senate's information paper, and it was titled Lifelong Learning for an Aging Society. And it was in 1991, and they quoted Milton Stern from the University of California at Berkeley. And he said, "It's easy to get sentimental about LLIs, but to my way of thinking, they can be seen not as organizations for lonely hearts, but for lonely minds. And that, at least, is the way we've looked at them. While I am a supporter of intergenerational education, I also believe firmly that just as teenagers have their own age group cadres, so older people need a place to call their own, in which they can live up to their potential." I'm going to let that sit for a second. When is the last time you thought about the potential of an older adult? Those words are typically not in the same sentence in our culture. And I would challenge you to think about some older adults or even yourself and remember regularly that if you have a pulse, you have potential and you have a purpose. And so that is something that is really key to lifelong learning. And I think that it's very important to note that. And so just remember, everybody has potential. And another thing I'd like to note is that from birth, Americans have a script. And it usually includes elementary, middle, and high school, some collection of college, career, marriage, family, all the and/ors there. But really, after that last act concludes, the script goes blank. And there's no user manual for retirement, unless you want to talk about how to afford it and how to pay for doctor's visits. And that's why I'm so passionate about creating and encouraging communities that are built on the concept of elderhood. And it really is a matter of purpose. Which brings us to our next point. Most lifelong learning institutes require member involvement, whether instructing a course, serving on a committee, or coordinating a special event. And this is something that's not unique to lifelong learning institutes. This can be found in many different organizations and many different causes and ways that people can get involved and give back and really just even being a friend or being a good neighbor. Those are great ways to find purpose in later life. And so one study back in 2014 at the Rochester School of Medicine said they studied 6,000 people, and it was a midlife in the United States study. And they found that greater purpose in life was consistently associated with lower mortality in young, middle-aged, and older people, which tells us that no matter what year you were born, you need purpose. And that can be found through lifelong learning. And then finally, I would like to share that community is a wonderful benefit of lifelong learning through many different ways and also at LLIs. And this is something that I'm very interested in talking about because as we've all learned, social isolation has skyrocketed in recent years. And of course, the pandemic was a contributing factor to that. But even beyond that, people are just interacting differently these days. And so lifelong learners who pursue learning in a social environment experience enhanced feelings of well-being, an increased sense of belonging, and a myriad of health benefits. We all know that we need people. We all need people. And as you continue to age and in later life, there is a greater loss of people that have been a part of your life. And so it's important to be intentional about continuing to add to that circle. And we'll touch on that a little bit more later. But this is something that we are so excited to see each and every day the power of community within lifelong learning. And the Attorney General's report that came out a couple of years ago that talked about the epidemic of loneliness in our country. The most encouraging thing about that 80-plus page report was that the solution was not some fancy new prescription or some complicated therapy methodology. The solution to social isolation is community, it's connectedness. And we believe that a solution can be connectedness and intellectual stimulation through lifelong learning. With that, I'm going to toss it over to Anne, who will take it away from here. And I look forward to interacting with you all in the chat as we proceed.
Thank you so much, Rachel, for that background. And again, we're going to jump off of what you've just shared in terms of the importance of lifelong learning and what you've seen in your experience and what the literature has shared about the importance of lifelong learning as an anti-ageism strategy through purpose, community, and mental stimulation. So I encourage folks as we're talking to please jump into the chat if you have things you want to share from your own experiences, both professionally and personally, and questions you'd like to ask, because we do intend that this is to be interactive. So I would like for us to first begin, thinking about what does it mean when we're talking about ageism. So let's kind of jump into what that looks like in terms of ageism. So, as you are probably all familiar, but we can all use a reminder that ageism is about all ages, right? It's not just about older people or younger people. It's not just about saying, oh, okay, boomer. It's not about just saying, oh, these millennials. It's any form of othering that is related to age. And the reason that this is damaging is because ageism, particularly internalized ageism, has been indicated to be a risk factor for multiple health factors. And we in the VCU Department of Gerontology suggest that this is a public health crisis that we need to be really considering. We cannot think about what types of programming and policies we're creating if the undercurrent is ageist. So you can see that these are some things that are identified through the literature. But I think the way we really, the take-home message here is Becca Levy's research suggests that internalized ageism has the potential of reducing your life expectancy by 7.5 years. I mean, that's really a quite an aha. That's the same as having a sedentary lifestyle. That's the same as smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. So as we move forward and think about, what that looks like, and how we're going to move forward in terms of disrupting ageism. This really, I never got into this business because I wanted to be the ageism police. Sometimes that happens, but that's really not the goal. Anytime, any type of prejudice begins with the internal work. And disrupting ageism begins with us. And that begins with thinking about redefining what we think about age, what we think about the process of growing older, and disrupting the single story. So the single story, as Rachel has already mentioned, is this concept that growing older is equated with decline and poor health rather than potential. And our responsibility in this field is to be focused on reminding ourselves that it is not a single story, that people are holistic, biopsychosocial, spiritual individuals, and it's not just one thing. So what we know about rethinking aging means that aging equals living. We don't get it to a particular point where we stop living and then all of a sudden we're aging. Oftentimes we hear people say the aging population. Well, the aging population is everyone. If you're breathing, like Rachel said, if you have a pulse, you have purpose. And if you have a pulse, then you are aging. So there's no such thing as the aging population. There may be the older population, there may be the midlife population, the younger population, but aging is all of us. So as I said, we think about, as gerontologists, we think about a biopsychosocial spiritual approach. This is about our physical experience of growing older, which is about the functioning of our bodies and our strength and our stamina and our mobility, our psychological aging, which is more about your emotions and your feelings, social, which is about your relationships with other people, and then your spiritual development, which is all about your meaning and purpose. Now, within our cultures, I would say, these are also very socially constructed, but it still has the opportunity to break it apart and for us to think about ourselves, not just about our chronology. I'm 57 years old, and it gives me an opportunity not just to think of myself as my chronology, but gives me an opportunity to think about myself in terms of, what is my functional age? Am I able to do the things that I want to do for my day-to-day experiences? What is my perceived age, which is, you all have heard people say, how old would I be if I didn't know how old I was? Well, and again, there's some social construction in that too, because you're comparing yourselves to what you think is the norm. But these are all different ways to think about age. And as a gerontologist, this is what we, are curious about. When people say things like, well, I feel so old. Well, what does that mean? Right? What does that mean? And oftentimes it may mean in comparison to other people my age, in comparison to what I would like to be doing. And digging down into that is how we really explore how we are going to have a conversation about what it means to be aging. And again, biological, psychological, social, and spiritual age, as we defined on the last slide. All right, so I'm curious for you all. So when shared in the chat, this is who you are and this is where you're from. Oftentimes when we introduce ourselves, we introduce ourselves as, hi, I'm Ann. I'm a faculty member in the VCU Department of Gerontology. And Rachel, hi, I'm Rachel. I'm the executive director in her dream job at LLI in Chesterfield. So and that's how we introduce ourselves. And that is really our human doing, right? That's not necessarily our human being as our whole biopsychosocial spiritual selves. And so I'm curious if you were going to add something to your own introduction in a biopsychosocial spiritual style, what would you say? So I'd encourage you to share that in the chat. Like if you were going to add something, what would that be? So Rachel, I'm gonna pick on you. Besides your dream job at LLI, what would you add in terms of your biopsychosocial spiritual self?
Well, I would share that I am really looking forward to my 40th birthday coming up on Groundhog's Day. And I would share that I love running. I'm part of a running group, and it's a crazy group of people that get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to run 3 days a week. And I love it. So I guess I'm one of the crazy people. And I have been a lifelong Christian and find a lot of meaning through my faith and sharing that with family and friends. And I love people. Like if I could just be with people all the time, that just fills my cup.
Right. There you go. And so you have just hit on all of the things, bio, psycho, social, spiritual, the whole thing. Now, I'm not suggesting that we go out into the world and introduce ourselves that way all the time, because that may be more than we want to share out in the world. But what I am encouraging is that we think about ourselves that way as whole people, not just human doings, but human beings, and that we think about others in that same way. So thank you, Rachel, for being the brave guinea pig. And so I see that there's some other, comments coming in. Oh, and somebody said happy birthday to you, Rachel. That's so nice. So others said, that they have interests such as cooking. That's exactly. And, I think to think about what our hobbies are and our interests are beyond just our work. And, there's a lot of research about role transitions, and Rachel spoke to this just a moment ago about the experience of horizonlessness is what I think of this as, that there's no script, there's no roadmap what later life looks like. And what we see is that folks who have I think of as like an identity pie. If your whole pie is your work, and then you retire from that work, oh my goodness, you've lost the whole pie. And I don't know about you, but I really love pie. So, you need to have lots of different things in your pie. So, as we think about what are your roles with other people, what are your hobbies, what are your interests, it's important to cultivate that across your lifespan in order to be a whole person. And that is one of the things that lifelong learning enables us to do. So thanks everybody for jumping in on this and sharing. So I think for myself, in terms of, being a gerontologist, and, sometimes we meet gerontologists and then I meet a lot of people who are like, I've never met a gerontologist before. And so I think it's important, in terms of the big why, which Rachel has suggested is a really important piece of what we're talking about here. If we're going to ask other people, what is your why? What's the point of doing all this work that we're doing? I like to make sure that I'm pretty solid in mine so I can engage other people in that conversation. And one of the very first things is about longevity equity. So we know across, these last couple of, I don't know, not quite 100 years, we've had a really great increase in longevity for some groups of people. But that is not the truth for everyone. And for me, this is really not okay. So, not all populations and communities have experienced this increase in longevity. So, for example, I live over here in this area, kind of near Westover Hills, where the life expectancy is around 83. Just about 5 miles away, just kind of close to where I am now at VCU, the life expectancy is 63. That's not okay with me, right? That's not okay. And so what is that about? Well, Rachel and I believe that a lot of that is about how do we engage with our sense of purpose, our sense of community, and our sense of mental stimulation. How can we work to disrupt ageism? What are some anti-ageism strategies that can help us level that playing field? And this is one of those. So, from a purpose standpoint, many of us move through our lives with, doing things that we think are the doing, right? We have our human doing things. And I always think about this quote, whether I'm talking to graduate students in gerontology and what they're planning to do with their lives, and alumni as they move through the process, and then elders as they're out in the world. And, what if you reach the end of your life and you realize that your ladder is against the wrong wall? So, not everybody is like Rachel, that she has been in her dream job for this dozen years, right? Not everybody is in that situation. But what I would love is for everybody to have the opportunity to be in that situation and find their sense of purpose and then build everything around that. So we think about this in terms of thinking about how to identify your own elder roles and then building from that. And again, Rachel mentioned that oftentimes there's no script for late life, there's no script for elderhood, but I do believe that there are plenty of examples of this. We just need to pay attention, right? People say there are no role models. I don't know, you can't hang out at an LLI and believe that there are no role models for what elderhood looks like. So let's share some different models for what this looks like. So this is one of the first ones. This is Maggie Kuhn, and most people know that she's the founder of the Gray Panthers. And then she said that elders will save the world. As risk takers who heal and humanize society, elders have 5 roles to play. I want you to think about this, about people that you know And then if you don't currently consider yourself an elder, then possibly, hopefully, you consider yourself to be an aspiring elder. So I want you to think about yourself in these roles. Do you see yourself as a mentor who teaches the young? Do you see yourself as a mediator who has the opportunity to resolve conflict? Do you see yourself as a monitor, of a watchdog of public, let's see, conflict? Do you see yourself as a mobilizer of social change? Or do you see yourself as a motivator, encouraging people towards public good? Now, you may see yourself as one of these, or none of these, or all of these, or a collection. So let's move on to the next list. So Bill Thomas talks about elderhood as an anticipated stage. I love this so much, that there's something to aspire to anticipate beyond middle adulthood. Now, I don't know if you all are familiar with the concept of the happiness U curve. I think of it, frankly, as the midlife pit, right? All the things that are just on our backs in terms of role overload that are present in midlife, that we many times are able to learn from and release as we move into later life. To me, that's why it's an anticipated life stage. We can talk about that on some other conversation. Park it, move on. Okay, so Bill Thomas says that there are three roles. One is legacy creator. Through the journey of discovery, many elders create and share legacies. We see that in many of the InterAge programs that we do at LLI, whether those are the opportunities for students to come into LLI and engage, or whether that's through classes that are InterAge, or whether that's, for example, the senior mentoring program. There are opportunities for that legacy creation. And similarly with wisdom giving, through sharing, through storytelling, and being a mirror for others. We see a lot of that through the InterAge experiences, and I suspect others do too. And then peacemakers, where elders are often able to see both sides of a situation as valuable peacemaking, their valuable peacemaking skills in any situation. And then the third framework that we want to share is from the Blue Zones that I anticipate folks are also familiar with, that's called Ikigai. And Ikigai is about your reason for being. And this concept suggests that across people's lifespan, they have a particular reason for being. And we're going to talk, I think, in a minute, maybe about the acorn theory, which is a concept from positive psychology that says that everybody has within them, their acorn that is their sense of purpose. And it may change across the lifespan in terms of how it's modified. Oh, thanks. There it is, right? How it is practiced and how it is evidenced, but it is within a person. And that's, I'm sure folks have seen or familiar, either read the book or seen the YouTube about the Blue Zones. Okay, so here's the question for you. When you think about these characteristics and roles that you've seen in these last three slides, can you think about a personal characteristic or contribution that you are most proud of? And could it be something that is an elder role? So I may put Rachel on the spot, but to give her a little minute, I'm gonna, I'll share an example of this that I think is, something for myself. So, and in that, I, think about something that my father used to say. He used to say, people say if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And my father said, everything's broke. And that may sound like depressing, but that's really not how he meant it. What he meant it was everything can be improved. So, many folks here have probably done their Clifton Strengths, and, that was very eye-opening for me because I found out that strategic is my number one strength, which fits perfectly with what I see as my work, right? My work, whatever my doing is, I see it as my work. That things are broken, and I'm here to fix things. I'm here to fix things that are broken. And there are lots of things in aging services and elder care that are broken. I'm sure we won't disagree on that. If we do, please call me because I'd love to talk about that. There are lots of things that are really a lot better than they used to be, and we still have work to do to ensure that our communities are great places for all people to grow old. So I consider that to be an elder role. And that fits in with multiple of these, these identified roles that either Maggie Kuhn or Bill Thomas talk about, because that happens through storytelling. I think about one of the things that I know, let's see, that Charlotte Arbogast talks about in terms of advocacy, that's both about stories and data. And fixing things is very much about stories and data, sharing what's not working, and then what are the steps to making improvements there. So I'm curious what kind of things folks have to share. And if Rachel, if you have one you want to share, I want to hear about it.
Yeah, thanks so much for the opportunity. One that is just very fresh in my mind is this semester we were able to work with several undergraduate students from the Bachelor of Science in Health Services here at VCU, and they both came into the office and volunteered alongside our members who volunteer in the office. And it was just really, really special to watch them learning from older adults through specific training, coaching, and observation. And what I didn't realize was that through observation, with us being involved in different conversations over the last few months, the disrupting ageism that I do just naturally because I have been learning and growing in this area for about 10 years, um, it just comes out naturally. And so someone said, like, oh, you look great for your age, or something similar to that comment. And just the way that I've been able to address that in a very respectful and lead people down the path of like, what is that? What are you really trying to say? When you say somebody looks great for their age, are you saying they look energetic, that they look beautiful, that they have a great energy? Like, what is it you're actually trying to say? And so it was really, really sweet to be nominated and receive an award for mentorship from one of the students. And it made me realize that mentorship doesn't always look like formal, let me sit down with you and teach you something specific. But it really can be more informal in a sense of just observing people who have different experiences than you. And that can go all different ways on the age spectrum, right? Anybody can be a mentor and anybody can be a mentee. So that's one that's really fresh.
You mentioned that as mentoring, but it's both mentoring and modeling and
Mm.
wisdom giving, and that's such a great example that hits on so many of the different roles. And thank you, Rachel, because I think that that's such an important thing to think about, because people may say, I mean, I see one of the comments here that says it can take a long time to realize what that sense of purpose is. And sometimes we need to do that in community, right?
Mhm.
Because I have that experience with people, and I'm sure you do too, that people say, well, I don't know, what is my role? And we're so accustomed to, again, across young and middle adulthood, to have someone else reinforcing our role for us, telling us what that role is. And because we think that late life is horizonless and there's no job description and there's no roadmap. We have to define that for ourselves, and we have no practice at that. We have no practice. And so we need to, as a community, work on how do we help people identify and support their roles when they may not have the practice to do that. Because to me, okay, so it's the same thing with this horizonlessness thing is not about age, just as you were saying, Rachel. That's not about age. To me, I see people who feel horizonlessness at young adulthood, moving into graduate school, graduating, middle adulthood, kind of feeling like they're plateauing in their career, which really to me is just transitioning to a new life phase, retiring, widowhood. There are all of these places where we feel like I don't know what's next for me because my role is not defined. And that is a very painful thing because we all need a sense of purpose and we have obligations with each other, not to each other, with each other to help support that sense of purpose. So I love all these comments that people are making. And we all have the opportunity, like Rachel, where's your name tag? You had it on and you took it off. Okay. So we all have the opportunity to name ourselves in terms of our elder role. You have that. You get to say. And if you don't want to say, oh, I named this myself, you can just blame me and say, well, Ayn Welleford told me I should call myself this. If you feel like you need permission, consider me your permission slip giver. I'm happy to do that for you. Okay. All right. Hi, Linda. I see you. LOL. Okay, next. All right. What else are we going to talk about here? Okay. So this is about community. Who helps you tend that acorn? Well, I've already said I'm happy to be your permission slip giver if you feel like you need somebody to help you do that. But I'd like for you to think about, some of you have identified your what you consider to be your roles, right? What you consider to be your elder role or your aspiring emerging elder role. Who helps you support that? Because I think we all need to have our own personal advisory board or board of directors. And they need to be people who are 100% supportive. And that does not mean necessarily just people who say, oh my goodness, you are so awesome. I mean, you want people who are cheerleaders, of course, but you also want people who are going to say, maybe you need to rethink this. Maybe you're kind of having an imbalanced perception of what this looks like. You want to have people who are going to encourage you to be your best possible self. That's what development is. And that can be hard, right? But you want to have some truth tellers in that experience. So let's talk about who you have, and feel free to share this in the chat. Who do you have that helps you cultivate your elder role? And Rachel, do you have anybody you'd like to share about that? Am I putting you on the spot?
I love to live on the spot. I honestly, you and Tracy, Dr. Gendron, have been have made a big impact on me in my development, especially in this role. I'm really grateful that I have a whole board of directors, and they each have a unique role within the organization and then a way that they support me. And certainly my parents, I'm grateful to have both of them, for them to be close, my husband. I think even my boys, my two boys, they help tend my acorn. They are, just such a source of joy, and I think they help me grow happy.
So happy. Well, and joy is fuel, isn't it?
Mhm.
So let's not, shortchange that. We want people to have, thank you so much, Rachel, for sharing that, because I think that's the point. We want to have people in different roles. We do not want to rely on just one person for all the things. We want to have a collection of people, and I encourage you to think about, not you, but all of us. I encourage all of us to, think about what is this person's role in my life and express gratitude to them directly on a regular basis for that role that they hold in your life. So this is another concept from the Blue Zones where they call it the Mawai. Again, for folks who are familiar with this, and if you're not, please check it out. Friends who commit to each other for 100 years. 100 years. 100 years. I love that. I love that. Anybody have a friend who they think they're going to be friends with for 100 years? I mean, the friend that I've had the longest, we've been friends since I was 12. Um, and her name is Nancy. I don't think I'll be friends with her for 100 years, but I anticipate I'll be friends with her for 90 years. Right? Okay, but think about that. People that you're committed to their development and you can think about what their history has been, people who hold your stories and you hold their stories, and you have this interactive experience with each other, and it's long-term and engaging. So, what does that look like in your own life? And I love that many of you have already shared this. So, I want you to think about your own village and your own, people who are on your advisory board, your personal advisory board. So, and what that looks like. So, I think about, I mentioned already, I have people who are cheerleaders. And if you think about, like, if you had these folks around the table, who would they be? Right? People who are cheerleaders and, people who are thought partners. I consider Rachel to be really a great thought partner, particularly in terms of this work that we're doing here with lifelong learning, with what we're doing with InterAge. I call my friend Julie, I call her my bouncer. Anybody else here have problems with negative self-talk, or is that just me? I'm probably the only one here who's ever had that problem, right? You don't have that problem, do you? So when I think about, these thoughts come into my mind. I think about Julie. I had a birthday party for my 50th birthday, and Julie had all these fun party favors. And at the party, I envision her thinking about saying, you know, here's your party favor. Have a great night. And escorting them out the door, right? That's not what she did at the party, but that's how I envision her. And maybe she kind of looks like one of those cigarette girls with those like things strapped on her shoulders. Anybody got that image? Anyway, so I think about that. Like, who are the people who help you do the things that you need support doing? So I want you to think about, who is there already and who would you like to add in, right? Who else do you need? Maybe you need to do some, recruitment into your village. I do also have permission slip givers. So, yeah, I'm happy to be yours because I have people who do that for me. So it's important to have a big village. And again, as Rachel mentioned, as we move through life, our social circle shrinks. And part of that is through death and loss that happens naturally across the lifespan. It also happens because we become more selective about the people that we're willing to spend our time with. And thankfully that happens because, sometimes we spend time with people just because of proximity or activity. But as we know ourselves better, we become more choosy. And that does result in a smaller social circle, but that can also be very beneficial because we're not as exposed so much to the toxicity of relationships that really don't fit with our I don't know, our soul contract, or, what it is, who we see as I see ourselves in terms of our sense of purpose. So I'd love to hear people's thoughts about that. And then this last piece is about something that we're not going to have a whole lot of time to talk about this, because I feel like this could be its own whole section. But this is a concept or a theoretical perspective by Rachel Wu that's called CALA. And this is really about cognitive agility across the lifespan. And so early on, and actually, Rachel, I might have a bumper sticker that says that, what you just said earlier. If you have a pulse, you have a purpose. I think we need to have bumper stickers about that. Okay, yeah, right. So this is very much in keeping with what Rachel Wu said. So her work began focused on infants. And, in infancy and childhood, we have a focus on, well, of course, you're going to improve and improve and improve. You don't like learn to walk and you stand up the first time and you walk and there you go. Check, check, done. No, you walk, you fall, you walk, you fall, you walk, you fall, you walk, you fall. So what her original research was about was saying, well, why do we think that we should just focus on maintaining cognition in late life? Why are we just maintaining? Why are we not continuing to grow? So through her research, she identified these 6 factors of intellectual engagement that demonstrate that if we create enriched environments where these factors are addressed, then individuals will continue their growth. And in fact, they will function as well as people at younger chronological ages. So I just want to kind of mention 2 of these. One of them, of course, is the growth mindset, right? It's not a fixed mindset that says, oh, well, this is where you are and this is where it's going to be. Done, dusted, yay, here, this is all you've got. But a growth mindset says, well, of course you can learn and improve. And that's very much about a LLI, lifelong learning focus. And then a forgiving environment, that you're in an environment where, yes, you're expected to learn things, you want to learn things, but there's not the pressure of, if you don't learn it the first time, then that's all you get. And so again, there are 6 of these principles. The reference is listed in the reference list, and she also has a couple of YouTubes that I'd encourage people to check out, because it's pretty compelling. It's pretty compelling. But I don't want to get into the weeds of that. But basically, the concept is that we need to reframe how we think about cognitive development and move beyond this single story that development declines or maintains, because there's no reason to believe that it doesn't continue to grow. So as Rachel said from the beginning, the whole goal of this is to think about how lifelong learning is a strategy to disrupt ageism. And we believe that it happens in these 3 pathways: through purpose, mental stimulation, and community. And there's plenty of, other evidence that supports this, but we're focused on the evidence that we see every day in members at LLI. And so at this point, I'll see if Rachel has anything else she wants to say, or if people want to jump in with questions. We're here until Jillian tells us we have to stop.
Thank you, Anne. It is so much to take in and digest, and I appreciate how you provide it in such bite-sized pieces and allow the time for reflection. I think that makes learning stickier when we're able to be interactive. And so thank you to everybody who interacted through the chat. And certainly for people watching a recording later, please do take the time to write down your answers to the many questions that we posed today, because that will it'll help you to digest the information and really integrate it into your life, your work life, and hopefully your personal life as well. looks like we had a question. Looks like we have a few minutes, and it was earlier on. One of our attendees said that he recently retired and has been focusing on other skills like playing keyboard at churches and volunteering for AARP as well as his church. And he has found ageism in the workplace to sometimes be subtle. For example, sensitivity on the part of younger workers when corrected or questioned by an older worker. So, when the goal of the older worker might be just to come to a common and respectful understanding of a project. And he asked if you had any advice or thoughts on that.
Well, do you have any advice on that, Rachel?
Well, I think it is very individual. We've seen ageism, we're all steeped in it in our culture. And so uh, it is unfortunately, far reaching. But it also, I think, is very personal. So it's cultural, there's cultural layers to it, but it's also very personal. So in your experience, Edward, that you had this experience with a particular worker, or maybe it's been several. I just recommend relationship and having experiences. So from their viewpoint, maybe older people in their lives have been critical or have not had positive comments and maybe have not come to it with the intention of finding common and respectful understanding. So a lot of times there is that cultural undercurrent, but it is also usually very personal where they may have had a bad experience with an older person in their life. So I think the greatest way to combat that is through personal relationship and creating that new narrative where you could be the story changer. And instead of thinking that older people are critical or just trying to make them feel bad or look stupid, that they would feel supported and seen and heard and valued by an older person.
Mm. That is such a great, I just love how you phrase that you can be, the new story. You can be the new story of that. And, part of that happens through just what you shared earlier, Rachel, about asking questions. Like, what do you mean by that? And just like we say that we are biopsychosocial spiritual people, we are also on these multiple spheres. Woo. Um, the micro level, the individual level, the micro level, meso, macro, etc. And so some comments fall on fertile soil. So if you have a history of being impacted by prejudice, then those things are going to fall on fertile soil for you and you're going to be more impacted. Because we know we all live in this, this macro narrative of that. But, it just goes to show how important it is that we're all aware and vigilant and kind and
Yeah.
not othering in any way.
And someone else recommended Good Doctor, that Kala is an excellent topic for a separate webinar. So we'll have to put that in the hopper for 2026.
Okay. Well, when we do the one for if we're invited to do one for 2026, I say we invite Wayne. 'Cause, uh,
Absolutely.
Rachel, Wayne, and I just had a chapter published in the Disrupt Ageism textbook from the Department of Gerontology, and yeah, there are lots of great things that are CALA related there.
Well, we would certainly welcome you back. And I'll just echo, I don't see any other questions at the moment, but I'll just echo all of the positive feedback that's pouring in from all of our attendees, noting how wonderful this presentation has been. I think it's certainly offered a lot of important pieces for reflection, both internally and societally, or socially, excuse me. So thank you very much, Anne and Rachel. This was an excellent presentation, and I appreciate you both sharing your time with us this afternoon.
Well,
Thank you
thank
so
you,
much.
Jillian. And
And
thank you
just
all for coming. Hope you all have a wonderful weekend.
Mhm.
sorry to just one more thing to note. keep your eyes on your inboxes. The follow-up correspondence to all attendees will be sent out, which will include the link to the recording and the slides as well. So you'll have access to all these resources. Thanks, everyone.